Called him and where the truth may lie in all of this. Mr. Sneiderman has sort of indicated that he is a master of detail in his professional life and Judge Gregory. We will see how that plays out right here, right now. Let's go into the courtroom and Judge Gregory A. Adams.
And admitted into evidence, and I would like to publish that to the jury at this time.
You may.
Are we doing it on the Elmo or whatever?
Yes, sir. You may.
Okay. Now, looking at Defendant's Exhibit number 13 at the bottom.
Can you see it on the screen, Mr. Sneiderman? Okay.
Did on January 13th of 2011 at 5:41 in the afternoon, did you send Andrea a email that said just a quick note about how much we enjoyed seeing and talking to you this morning on Skype? We have missed the interaction with you and the kids. Is that what it says, sir?
Yes, sir.
It is important to us to be a part of your life and the lives of our grandchildren. Please Skype us whenever you can. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
And did Andrea then respond with a text message to you the following day on January the 14th?
Yes.
Okay. And she goes into some detail talking about how difficult it had been, things about, okay, it speaks for itself. Fair enough. Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the objection. What's the objection?
My objection is to the self-serving nature of the statement and the manner in which Mr. Clegg is publishing it.
All right, I'm going to sustain that objection.
Well, it has been admitted, Your Honor, so it speaks for itself. So.
All right.
Okay. Now, you did have some communication with Andrea back in December and January of 2010 and 2011, did you not, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yesterday we spoke about the December 30th, which would have been the 10th anniversary of their marriage. Again, did you recall or do you recall having any contact with Andrea on that day?
No, I do not remember having any contact with her at that time.
But you did Skype, you did have access to Skyping at that time, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Over the following period of time, would you have during December of 2010, do you recall Skyping at all with Andrea?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. Do you recall Skyping with either Andrea or the grandkids during the year 2011?
I may have. I don't recall.
Okay, and at some point, do you recall getting finding out that Sophia had some sort of eye device that enabled you to Skype directly with her?
She had some device on her iPod, and we never set it up, so we never did that.
Okay. Now, yesterday, you were asked some questions on direct examination about civil litigation. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. And there is currently a civil litigation going on involving the state of Georgia and Mrs. Sneiderman, correct?
Yes.
And you have sought to intervene in that civil litigation, have
Yes.
you not? That civil litigation is currently pending in the Superior Court of Fulton County as opposed to DeKalb County, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You are the contingent beneficiary on one of the life insurance policies, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And for those of us who are not familiar with insurance, first off, can you explain what a beneficiary is?
That's the person who would get the proceeds of the life insurance on the death of...
And what is the contingent beneficiary?
That's the person who would get the money in the event that, in this case, if Andrea had died before Rusty or in a simultaneous death.
Okay. So if for whatever reason Andrea could not be the beneficiary, then the contingent beneficiary would get the proceeds of the insurance policy, correct?
That's correct.
And as your status as a contingent beneficiary, you are seeking to get the proceeds of at least one of the life insurance policies, correct?
No, that's really not correct.
No. Okay, go ahead, sir. Feel free to explain.
Answer. Go ahead.
Okay. When Rusty set up the policy, his children weren't born, so he needed a contingent beneficiary in the event of a simultaneous death. So he named me. Now that the children are there, that money belongs to my grandkids. It would be put into a trust for them. I have no intention of taking the money. I only intervened because the civil lawyer who represents Andrea drafted a trust agreement which I didn't like, and I wanted to vote in the language of the trust.
Okay. When you say the civil lawyer who represents Andrea, that is not any of those folks who are...
Some of them. Some of you are represent her.
I am not, is that
You
your
are not.
statement? Okay.
No, you are not.
Mr. Morgan and Mr. Petrie are not, is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
Okay. And there was a trust agreement, when you say drafted a trust agreement, would that have been a trust agreement for the benefit of the kids?
Yes,
And would the kids in question be Ian and Sophia?
yes,
And they are, so there's no mistake, the kids of both Andrea and Rusty, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. And there was apparently an inability or a lack of resolution as to that particular trust, correct?
That's correct.
And that is why you have sought to intervene, is that correct?
Yes, I want to vote in the language of the trust.
Now, going back to the morning of November the 18th of 2010, I just want to make sure I understand the time chronology correctly. You got a call from Andrea at 9:30 or shortly thereafter, is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
And that was a very brief phone conversation, correct?
Yes,
You then attempted to communicate with Rusty, is
yes,
that correct?
yes.
At any time, did you leave a message while attempting to communicate with Rusty, if you recall?
I don't recall.
At some point shortly thereafter, you called directory assistance to try to get the number for Dunwoody Prep, correct?
Yes,
You certainly did not have that number available at that time.
no,
And when you called Dunwoody Prep, you were told, you related the conversation yesterday, but at some point you became aware of the fact, somebody at Dunwoody Prep told you that Rusty had been shot, correct?
that's correct. They confirmed it.
And that would have been some 15 to 20 minutes after your original call with Andrea, is that correct?
About that, yes.
Now, and again, I realize we're dealing with approximations, but say the first phone call comes in around 9:35, 15 to 20 minutes after that phone call with Andrea would be 9:50 to 9:55, correct?
Something like that.
What exactly did the folks at Dunwoody Prep tell you?
We asked what had happened, and the lady said Rusty had been shot. And we had some discussion about the extent of his wounds and his injuries and that kind of stuff, and they were telling us that he was hurt badly, and somebody there gave us the number for the Atlanta Medical Center for us to call and track him down.
Okay. Now, did anyone give you specifics as to how many times he had been shot?
No,
But you were in fact told by the folks at Dunwoody Prep that he had been hurt badly, correct?
his pulse was weak, was what they had said.
And you were also told that he had been transported to Atlanta Medical Center, correct?
Yes,
So you knew at that point that emergency medical intervention had been necessary, correct?
yes,
And that would have been around 9:50 to 9:55 in the morning, correct, sir?
something like that.
Steve was going from Cleveland to Chicago to Hawaii, correct?
Yes,
After you got off the phone at Dunwoody Prep, did you immediately call Steve and convey to him the extent of what you believed Rusty's injuries to be at that time?
no, I sent him an email.
Okay. And that was at 10:38, correct?
Yes,
Now, 10:38 is about 40 minutes or so at least.
I can't tell you what time I called Dunwoody Prep.
You don't recall the time you called
I
Dunwoody Prep?
don't know what time it was when I called Dunwoody Prep. So as soon as I could get my faculties together, I sent Stephen an email.
Okay. Can you estimate, and if you cannot, that is fine, sir, but can you estimate for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the amount of time that passed from the time when you had the conversation with the folks at Dunwoody Prep until you communicated with Steve?
I really can't tell you. It was not very long.
Yesterday, you indicated that you did not tell Steve to stop his trip because you did not know anything about the extent of his injuries at that time.
That's correct.
When I say he, I mean Rusty, right?
Correct.
But you have testified this morning, if I am understanding correctly, that when you talked to the folks at Dunwoody Prep, they told you it was pretty bad, right?
He told me his pulse was weak. Didn't tell me how bad it was. I didn't know. So I told Stephen to go on.
how lengthy of a conversation did you have with the folks at Dunwoody Prep about Rusty's condition, if you recall, sir?
3-4 minutes.
Okay.
Not very long.
And again, you do not recall the name of the individual that you spoke to, right?
Nope.
And the individual who gave you both the name and number for Atlanta Medical Center was not the person to whom you were speaking,
That's
but
correct.
someone in the background.
Someone in the background.
You talked about the life insurance, and I guess I'm a little confused, and I apologize. Yesterday, when you were looking for, at the house, when you got to Dunwoody and you were at Andrea's house looking for life insurance documents, you said you found something. Was that the actual policy itself?
No. I found the bills for the policy.
Was there anything on the bill which shed light as to the amount of the policy?
Yes.
Did you subsequently have any communication yourself with a representative of Northwest Mutual Insurance Company?
I don't think so.
Okay. Does the name Bert Clark ring any bells for you?
He was a person that Rusty worked with at Northwestern.
Okay. Do you recall having any communication with Bert Clark yourself on or about, or during the period of time when you would have been in Dunwoody after Rusty had been shot?
I don't recall ever talking to Bert.
Okay. Do you recall there being a safe at the home of Rusty and Andrea while you were there?
I know there's a safe in the house. I don't remember ever looking at it.
Do you remember anyone attempting to open the safe and not being able to do so?
No, I do not.
Can you estimate for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the number of phone calls you had between yourself and Andrea in the month of November after you folks left Cleveland and went back to, or left Atlanta, I'm sorry, and went back to Cleveland?
Half a dozen.
Okay. And during the month of December, can you estimate the number of times you would have spoken to Andrea on the phone?
Half a dozen.
Okay. So it was reasonably frequently, not every day by any stretch of the
No.
imagination?
We called a lot, but we didn't get to her.
Okay. Were you here, you testified in Mr. Newman's trial, correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
And were you excused after your testimony and allowed to remain in the courtroom?
Yes.
Did any psychiatrist testify?
I believe there were 3 psychiatrists who testified, maybe 4.
Okay. And were there psychologists as well, or
Yes.
mental health experts?
Yes.
Do you recall the total number of mental health experts who testified?
Dr. Freckhouse.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?
5, 6.
I'm all over the objection. Go ahead. I'm giving some latitude.
You believe 6 testified?
5 or 6, I don't recall.
The issue at Mr. Newman's trial was whether he was insane at the time he committed the offense, correct?
I'm going to object to that, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain it on that objection. You want to ask a different question?
Your Honor, may I be heard briefly?
Give me a pro. Come on up, lawyers.
I'm Jeff Hellinger along with defense attorney Will Smith. The attorney is now moving toward the bench and in front of Judge Adams. At issue here is Tom Clegg's use of the word insane when it came to Hemi Newman.
Well, he was asking whether or not insanity was at issue in the trial and
And Murder Trial Part 2. It really has had that sort of feel over the last 3 days.
Oh, 100%. I think regardless of what you think about the case, you recognize that it's almost like he's a co-defendant here, even though he's not. But yeah, people knew about the trial, and it bleeds over to this trial.
You know, yesterday the Melanie White, who was the Dunwoody realtor, who was talking about her relationship with Hemi Newman, and Hemi, relaying allegations of his relationship with Andrea Sneiderman of a very intimate nature. The question whether he is credible or not, whether, he has a sort of fictionalized account of all these things that transpired between April of 2010 and the murder in late November of 2010.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think the scandal and the melodramatic nature is something that the prosecution's counting on here. Because a lot of these counts deal with, did she lie about their relationship? And the melodrama is something that I think the prosecution started from day one.
How long do you think Don Sneiderman is going to be on the witness stand? Most of the morning?
Without a doubt, most of the morning. I think that the defense, like we were talking about earlier, needs to go slow and methodical with a lot of caution in questioning him as a witness, because he is an extremely sympathetic witness. Something horrible and tragic happened to him. And so to undercut his credibility, it's going to take some time.
All right. The attorney's now back
You
to
may
the
proceed
table.
with those instructions. I sustain the objection to the last question that was put forth.
Was there evidence presented at Mr. Newman's trial concerning his mental status as of November the 18th of 2010?
Yes,
Was there evidence presented as to his mental status by both the state and by the defense?
yes,
Was there a dispute at the trial as to whether or not Hemi Newman was the person who shot and killed your son?
no,
1 minute, please, Your Honor.
You may take as much time as you need.
Let me go back, okay. You had, Andrea did in fact maintain some contact with you in the months that followed January of 2011, right?
yes,
Did you have occasion to attend, or did you visit her at any point? Well, let me ask you this first. Did you and your wife come down to the Atlanta area for court proceedings related to Mr. Newman?
yes,
And would you have done so or did you plan to do so in October of 2011?
yes,
Was the trial originally scheduled for trial?
yes,
When I say the trial, Mr. Newman's trial,
yes,
October of 2011.
yes,
Was it continued at the last minute?
yes,
Did it actually take place in February of 2012?
yes,
Did you come to Atlanta in October of 2011, even though the case was continued?
no,
Were you invited to Ian's birthday party in October of 2011?
yes,
Did you attend that party, sir?
no,
Did Andrea, during the course of that time, provide you with pictures of the kids?
yes,
How often would she have provided you with pictures of the kids, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Do you remember the method or technique that she would have used to provide you with pictures of the kids?
She would have emailed them to Costco, and I would go to Costco and pick them up.
Do you remember actually viewing some of those pictures?
Yes,
And would they have been of birthday parties and similar type gatherings?
yes,
Were there a few pictures or a lot of pictures?
there were a lot.
Okay. When you say a lot, can you quantify that? And if you can't, that's perfectly fine, sir.
There was a bunch.
Okay. Had you, prior to Rusty's death, received pictures of family gatherings, birthday parties, things
All
of
the
that
time.
sort? Okay. And based on, and you've seen the pictures before Rusty's death, obviously, of family gatherings, right?
Yes,
Based on your review of those pictures, who was it who was taking the pictures?
Rusty took the pictures.
Okay. Rusty was not often depicted in the photographs. right?
Rusty was rarely in the pictures.
He was the guy actually taking
He was the guy
pictures.
with the camera.
Okay.
Ms. Untitled.
Do you remember Andrea communicating with you in regard to the scholarship for Rusty?
Yes,
Ms. Untitled.
And do you remember Andrea inviting you to participate in a conference call regarding that particular
yes,
scholarship for Rusty? Okay. Did you attempt at some point to do so?
wasn't really interested in the scholarship program that she set up because at that time we already suspected that she had some involvement in the death of my son. So we had very little interest in doing anything. Whether I took part in the conference call or not, I don't remember.
Okay. Well, let me show you what I will mark for purposes of identification, as I believe it will be defense exhibit number 15.
At this point, you do not have a 14, or you just
I
skipping
have a
14?
14 marked, Judge. I'll tell you what I will...
No, that's fine, I know.
No, that's fine. I will
We're just keeping
probably-
track of the numbers.
What I will do right now is I've already shown it to Ms. Cross. Yeah. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Sir, let me show you a document that has been marked for purposes of identification as defense exhibit number 14, and ask if you recognize that particular document.
Yes.
And what is defense exhibit number 14, sir?
This is a motion to the Fulton County Court to have me intervene in the civil case that's pending.
Is your son, Steve, is the estate also sought to intervene in that particular litigation, sir?
Yes.
But the initial parties to that lawsuit were the state of Georgia and Andrea Sneiderman, correct?
Yes.
Now, let me show you what I have marked for purposes of identification as defendant's exhibit number 15. Your Honor, might I tender into evidence, or seek to tender into evidence, defense exhibit number 14 at this
Any
time?
objection to 14 at this time?
I do have an objection, Your Honor, not to the pleading itself, but to the attachments containing irrelevant information to the relevancy of the document.
I misunderstood, Your Honor. I will be glad to remove the attachments if Ms. Cross wishes. I was under the impression she wanted them, but that was my mistake.
All right. I will allow in D14 without the attachments, and I will direct the lawyers to remove the attachments at this point in time.
I don't know, abundance of caution before I forget that. So right now.
All right.
Show the document to Ms. Cross.
All right. 14 submitted without objection. You may publish it to the jury if you wish.
Not at this time, Your Honor.
All right.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sneiderman, let me show you a document that has been marked for purposes of identification as defendant's exhibit number 15. Do you recognize that document, sir?
Okay.
And do you recognize that, sir?
I guess it's there, but I don't remember it.
Okay. Do you recall receiving an invitation from a guy named Greg Gerstenbacher, or I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name, and Andrea, to participate in a conference call regarding the scholarship fund?
I'm not mentioned in that.
I'm sorry?
I'm not mentioned in that email,
Okay.
so I didn't get that.
Look at the, okay.
You may approach.
Do not publish it, please, sir.
Hold it down for a minute.
It's, my name's not here.
Okay,
So I didn't get this email.
okay,
I got this email.
okay. Did you get an email from Andrea?
Yes,
telling you if
yes.
you would- Okay.
I got an email from Andrea, but not
Okay.
from this great.
And was the document on the bottom attached, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you respond to Andrea's email?
Yes, I tried to get in, and the code they gave me was invalid. I apparently had the wrong date.
Okay. The code was correct, you had the wrong day, correct?
Yeah, because there's no date in here.
Okay. The conference call is
Yeah,
March 17th?
but I don't know if I got that.
You called on March 15th, right?
Right.
But the code is contained in the document after the date, right?
Yes,
And you had the right code, right?
yes,
You simply got the wrong date, correct?
right,
So you attempted to communicate
yes,
in this conference call, right?
yes.
Now, you have just testified here a few minutes ago that you were not interested
I was
in
not
being...
interested in, I was not interested.
but you attempted to communicate and participate in the conference call, correct?
I was going to listen in.
But you simply got the date wrong, right?
Yep.
Okay. Your Honor, I would move to admit defense exhibit number 15 into evidence at this time.
Any objection?
Your Honor, he hasn't identified the document. I don't think a proper foundation has been laid for the entire document. Mr. Simon's portion of it, I think he's identified. The remainder of the document, I think is relevant, we object.
Mr.
You
Clerk?
know, the relevant portions of the document, I have questioned Mr. Sneiderman about specifically whether it was forwarded to him by Mrs. Sneiderman and whether he responded. That is why I'm seeking the admission of the document.
Mr. Clegg, let me ask, I have no problem letting that portion in, but I think there was a portion in which he said he did not recognize that he may not have received. Can that be separated?
I'm sure we can do that, Judge, yes.
I will allow in the portions in which he identified, as far as the email from your client and
Yes,
maybe
sir.
his response, but there was something else that he said he did not recognize that he may not have received. I would direct that that be quote-unquote removed before it's published to the jury.
No problem, Judge.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome. You may continue.
Yes, sir. You continued to help Andrea with her taxes after that date, correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Now, tax time, I guess most of us know, is in April.
Yes.
Or thereabouts. Taxes are due usually on April the 15th or the first Monday thereafter.
Yes.
And you continued to do Andrea's taxes on her behalf, correct?
On Rusty's behalf.
Okay. How long did you continue to assist her with her taxes?
Till that was the last filing I did for them.
I'm sorry,
That was the last filing I did.
2011 would have been the last time?
2010 was the last one, done in 2011.
Okay, so 2010 would have been the last time you would have helped her
Yes.
with her taxes?
Yes.
You did not assist her in 2011, is that correct?
No. I helped her with her 2010 filing, which was due April 15th, 2011.
Okay, I'm sorry. So 2010 year taxes are due in
Yeah.
April of 2011.
We're a year behind, accountants are a year behind everybody
I'm not an
else.
accountant, sir, I apologize.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question going back to November 19th of 2010. You had indicated that when the Dunwoody Police Department detectives were at your house interviewing Andrea, that you were present, correct?
I was at Andrea's house and Rusty's
At
house.
Andrea's house, yes, I'm sorry. You were present, correct?
Yes.
And you actually sat in and listened to the interview as it was taking place, correct?
Yes.
Did you mention anything to either of the Dunwoody detectives, I believe it was a Sergeant Cordellino or an Investigator Thompson, about your conversation with Andrea of the day before?
No. At that time, I didn't think it was relevant.
Okay. Did you have occasion, you guys came down to, when I say you guys, I apologize, you and Mrs. Sneiderman came down again to meet with Mr. Geary in May of 2011, correct?
Yes.
Did you meet with Andrea and her kids at that time?
Yes.
Where did you meet at?
Cold Stone, an ice cream parlor.
Ice cream parlor? Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember.
And that would have been, was that the day that you actually talked to Mr. James and Mr. Geary?
I believe it was.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this, or yesterday you made reference to Mr. Geary and then you said the district attorney. At that time, did you recall Mr. James's name?
Yes.
Okay. All right. At some point, did Andrea contact you and ask you if you were no longer on Skype?
No, we were always on Skype. What we did is we had, when Rusty was alive, our Skype was always on and we were always online, so that when he was in the mood to call me on Skype, he just dialed me up and my machine answered.
Okay.
And his machine was always on. So if I wanted to talk to him, I could dial him up anytime I wanted to. After he passed away, we decided not to be able to have free access like that without an appointment, because we didn't want to be in Andrea's house without her permission, without asking. We also didn't want her in our house without her asking.
Okay. You did at some point ask that certain mementos from Rusty's youth be provided to you and your wife, right?
Some mementos, yes.
Yes. And Andrea, in fact, sent a box up to you containing those items, right, sir?
She consent to some of the things we asked for.
Okay. I guess there was a dispute about the high school yearbooks, right?
There was a dispute about a lot of things.
Was that, were the items sent up to you prior to your meeting with the district attorney's office in May of 2011?
I don't remember when they came.
Had there been any sort of dispute with Andrea prior to May of 2011?
We had asked for the stuff and got no response.
Okay, I understand, sir, but I'm just trying to focus on a particular time period if I can. Was there any dispute that you had with Andrea prior to May of 2011?
I don't recall when the dispute occurred.
Was there any other dispute?
No, there were things that we had given to Rusty and that Rusty had taken from our house that I wanted back. There were some autographed books from a client of mine who wrote the books. There were some other things.
Okay. Now, again, there was an unveiling of Rusty's headstone in, I guess, September of 2011, correct?
Yes,
And you were not in attendance, is that
that's
correct?
correct.
You came down, obviously, for Mr. Newman's trial,
Yes.
correct? How long were you in the Atlanta area for during that time, sir?
As long as the trial started, from the day it started until the day it ended.
Have you been in the Atlanta area since, with the exception of matters related to the prosecution of this case?
Yes,
So you have been here for reasons other than,
came down to visit my grandkids.
okay. 1 minute, sir.
Take as much time as you need.
Okay, thank you, Judge. I
Go
don't
back on
believe
the
I have any
record.
other questions. Judge, I'm done.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
You're quite welcome.
Can I redirect them?
Ms. Cross, you may redirect if you wish.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're quite welcome.
Mr. Sneiderman, Mr. Clegg asked you several questions about dates.
Yes.
What is more clear in your mind today, the date that Rusty moved to Boston or the call when Andrea told you Rusty had been shot?
The call is always more important.
What was more significant event in your life? The first time Andrea appeared at your house while in college, or the time that Andrea called and told you that Rusty had been shot?
Obviously, when Rusty was shot.
All right. Mr. Clegg asked you a series of questions about your contact and communication with the defendant and with the children after Rusty's death.
Yes.
Tell me, what was it like in your family after you learned that the defendant's boss had been arrested for the murder of your son?
We immediately thought somehow that Andrea was involved. It was one of those things we just couldn't believe, but everything we saw and heard told us that she had a relationship with this man, and that man had killed my son.
Did you struggle with the fact that your grandchildren were living with and in the custody of the defendant?
Absolutely.
Did you struggle, or tell me how, if you did,
You know, I'm going to...
Struggle.
I'm sorry, what's the objection?
A question that begins, "Did you struggle?" is by its very nature a leading question.
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor.
All right, I will sustain that objection. Let's ask non-leading questions, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Tell me, if you can, Mr. Sneiderman, in your own words, about the issue of seeing your grandchildren and keeping in communication with your grandchildren.
We had always talked to the grandkids over Skype as soon as they were probably old enough to comprehend the fact that they were seeing us. In fact, Marilyn and I always joked that the first time Sophia came to see us, that we would be three-dimensional and not two-dimensional, and we didn't know if she would recognize us. So we always we wanted to keep a line open to my grandkids. These are Rusty's kids. They will always be Rusty's kids.
What, if any, difficulty have you had in keeping communication with the kids?
We now have an agreement that says we talk to the kids on Skype every Saturday morning. Calls are short because the kids, they're 5 and 6 and 7 and that kind of stuff, and they have a short attention span, but they still want to see them, they still want to talk to them, and still want to see that they're growing up and that they're healthy.
Are you complying with the terms of the agreement for visitation?
Yes.
Is the defendant complying with the terms of agreement for visitation?
There was a trip that was scheduled for June for the kids to come to Cleveland, and Andrea said no.
All right. Mr. Clegg also asked you about some of the events that you recall from the trial of Newman.
Yes.
Do you recall if there was a dispute about the relationship between Mr. Newman and Ms. Sneiderman?
Dispute. She said no, there was no relationship, and the argument was that he said, at least in his emails, that there was.
Okay. Do you recall if there was a dispute about Mr. Newman having imagined a relationship with Andrea?
There was some discussion of that.
All right. I want to direct your attention to the interview that the defendant did with the police. I think you testified in your presence on November 19th, 2010.
Yes.
Do you recall Mr. Clegg asking you those questions?
Yes.
And you recall being present when Andrea spoke with the police?
Yes.
And had you ever heard the name Hemi Newman before that night?
Yes.
How had you heard that name?
Rusty had met with him August, September. Andrea had asked him to meet with him to see if he could find him a job. Mr. Newman was looking to leave GE, and Rusty was trying to help him find a job.
Okay. Had he just mentioned that to you at some point?
Yeah, he said that they were going to have a lunch and that kind of stuff, and he told me he had forwarded Mr. Newman's resume out to some people that he knew.
Let me ask you, after hearing the defendant talk to the police on November 19th, 2010 about her relationship with the defendant, were you under the impression that there had been a romantic relationship between the two of them?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
What's the objection?
Were you, as a leading question, were you under the impression that? And then
I'll rephrase it, Your Honor.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Let's rephrase.
What, if any, impression did you have or were you left with about the relationship between the defendant and Hemi Newman?
The impression I got was that he had made a pass at her and that she had said no.
Were you under the impression, I'll rephrase,
You're right.
was that the extent, or can you tell me the extent that you believe the relationship to be based on what Andrea told the police?
That's all I thought it was one pass. And I have to tell you that in the middle of that discussion, Steve arrived from Hawaii and I left the room.
Okay, thank you. All right. Mr. Clegg asked you about a number of emails and a number of dates. I want to ask you, what events, specifically phone calls, what phone calls stand out to you when you think about the events when you learned and then in the immediate aftermath of your son's murder?
There are two calls. The first call is from Andrea where she said that Rusty was shot. The second call is from when I called the doctor at the Atlanta Medical Center, and he said that Rusty had come in with multiple gunshot wounds and could not survive.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Mr. Clegg, any requests?
very briefly, Your Honor.
You may ask as many as you wish.
Did Rusty tell you anything about Andrea's plans to go to Boston on November 22nd?
No.
About her plans to start doing contract work for Harvard Business Publishing after?
Yeah, they were talking about whether or not she could sign up for more contract work, but that was still up in the air.
And just so I understand, sir, you became suspicious of your daughter-in-law when you found out about the arrest of Hemi Newman, correct?
Absolutely.
That was on
January
the
4th, 2011.
And you communicated the contents of this phone conversation on May the 25th of that same year. Is that correct, sir?
No, that's when I documented it.
You documented it.
I wrote an email for Mr. Gary to have something in his file. We had talked about it before that.
but you don't recall when.
Nope.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Any redirect, redirect, Ms.
No,
Carter?
Your Honor.
Lawyers, Mr. Sneiderman be released and excused from his subpoena, or do you want him to remain under subpoena?
You may be released by the state, Your Honor.
Mr. Clay, defense?
Give me a minute to think that over.
Take as much time as you need.
Okay.
We'll wait right here. Keller, we're back on the record. Yes, sir?
Your Honor, we may need to recall Mr. Sneiderman, so I would ask that he not be excused.
You'll be excused from coming down, Mr. Sneiderman, but you have to remain under subpoena
Your Honor, may I be heard on that?
on whether or not he can come down.
Not whether he may come down, but whether
Okay,
he...
let's let him come down. You can
Thank
come
you.
down. You can come down, Mr. Sneiderman. Yes, ma'am, I'm listening.
Your Honor, per a stipulation between the parties, there may be an agreement with about Mr. Simon's presence in the courtroom, and we'd like to take that up, please, if you wouldn't mind. I think it might need to be outside the presence of the jury.
Let's do it this way. Lawyers approach.
Jeff Highland, you're back with 11 Alive's continuing coverage of the Andrea Sneiderman trial, along with defense attorney Will Smith, and we are now looking at Andrea Sneiderman as she sits at the table making some notes this morning. Don Sneiderman, her former father-in-law, sort of gives an illustration of a very strained relationship with her before and after the murder.
And I think that's what the defense was trying to show, is that he's certainly a biased witness, and that everything that he's testified to the prosecution comes from somebody that didn't like her from the beginning, and that really taints her testimony. And I think Tom Clegg did a great job of showing that today.
What kind of notes do you think she is taking right now as we take a look at her?
That's hard to say. Probably something to do with several of the timeline issues that Don Sneiderman testified to. Maybe something to do with that conference call. I definitely think that his statement that he wasn't interested in being in that conference call really hurt him when he then went back on it and said that he did try to get involved in it, but he wasn't interested. It just didn't seem very credible to me.
At the same time, Don Sneiderman trying to show on the witness stand his attention to detail is
Right.
supreme.
And I think that the defense did a good job of showing that his attention to detail may be a little selective, but at the same time, I will give credit to Anna Cross for getting back up there on the prosecution, and I think that she made a point that certain details in time were probably less important to him than finding out that his son had been shot, and that made a lot of sense, and I certainly think it did rehabilitate him to some extent.
What sort of impact on the jury does it have when he talks about his grandkids, that they will always be Rusty's children, and the sort of difficulty that they had trying to maintain a relationship with those grandchildren? How does that play with jurors?
Guessing what a juror is going to think about something requires a mastery that I don't think anybody has right now. But I can say that I think it can cut both ways.
We're back on the record. Ms. Cross, anything else?
No, Your Honor, just he asked that this witness be excused to remain in the courtroom per the agreement between the parties.
Ms. Petrie,
That's correct, Your Honor.
what is correct?
That there is an agreement that the witness can remain exempted from the rule of sequestration at this point.
All right. I will enforce the agreement that the lawyers agreed to prior to this trial. All right. Who's the next witness? Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the state calls Alan Schlachtley.
And based on that agreement, Mr. Sneiderman may remain.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Somebody may want to communicate that with me.
Yes.
Raise your right hand. I swear affirmatively, testimony you shall give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir. Yes. Okay, go ahead. Have a seat, state, spell your name for the record.
My name is Alan Schachtley. Spelling is A-L-A-N. Last name spelling is S-C-H-A-C-H-T-E-L-Y.
Good morning, Mr. Schlafly.
Morning.
Where are you employed, sir?
I work for General Electric
How long have you been employed with General Electric?
since 2002.
And in what capacity were you employed with General Electric back in November of 2010?
In November of 2010, I was a process engineer, process improvement engineer.
Process improvement engineer?
Yes, that's correct.
And was your office located here in the Atlanta area?
Yes, it was.
Where was that?
It was in a building on Powers Ferry Road at 2018 Powers Ferry.
Okay. Do you know the defendant in this case?
Yes, I do.
How do you know her?
We work together.
And in terms of your office and her specific office, where were the two in relation to one another?
Our offices were right next to each other in the 2018 building.
And did you have contact with her regularly?
Yes, I did.
I want you, if you can, to recall the events of November 18, 2010. Okay, do you remember that day?
I do.
Were you in the office that day?
No, I was not in my office. I was in a training class.
Where was the training class being held?
It was in a different building, in our main headquarters building. It's called the 4200 building.
Okay, but it would still say on the GE, I call it a campus, is that correct?
Yes, it was on the GE campus.
Okay. Do you remember what time your training took place that day?
The training started at 8 a.m.
And you were there on time?
Yes.
Did you see the defendant at all that day?
No, I did not.
Did you have any contact with her at all that day?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall about what time you had contact with her?
At approximately 10:30 in the morning.
And tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you would, what type of contact you had with her.
I received a text message from Andrea.
Where were you when you received the text message?
I was in my training class.
Okay. And when you received the text message from her, did you respond immediately?
She had sent a text message asking for me to call her as soon as possible. I responded back 5 minutes because I was in training and I was going to wait for a break before I called.
So when you say you responded back 5 minutes, are you saying you responded back within 5 minutes, or 5 minutes was your response?
5 minutes was my response on the text.
Okay. And did you, in fact, wait 5 minutes before communicating with her?
No, she sent a second text message to me that said that my husband had been shot.
So when you got the text message saying my husband had been shot, what did you do, sir?
I texted back calling. I got up, walked out of the training class, found a place where I could make a phone call, and I called her.
Now, the device on which you received these text messages, was it a personal phone? Was it a work phone?
It was a GE phone, a BlackBerry.
GE BlackBerry. And was the communication that you had with the defendant back on the 18th memorialized?
Yes, when I spoke with the investigators later, they took a picture of it.
Okay. I'm going to first, Your Honor, for the record, show counsel what I'll mark for identification purposes as states 57.
You may.
Thank you. And 58.
You may.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Shackley, if you would take a look at what I've marked for identification purposes as states 57, 58, and tell me if you recognize what's depicted in those photographs, sir.
Yes, this is the BlackBerry that I had at that time, and what's depicted is a photograph of the text messages that we had back and forth that day.
And were those the photographs that were memorialized by the police officers during the time that they interviewed you, sir?
Yes, that is correct.
And do the photographs in states 57 and 58 fairly and accurately depict the messages as they were displayed on your phone the day you received them from the defendant?
Yes, they do.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to admit into evidence States 57 and 58.
Any objection?
No objection.
Hearing no objection, you admit it without objection.
Thank you.
You may publish them if you wish.
I do, Your Honor. May I approach the
You may.
recording? I'm going to ask Mr. Pasquarello if he would display them for us. Let's start with States 57.
So you can
And
look
it-
at either that monitor or that monitor or the one behind you.
Now, before we start, sir, take a look at States 57 and tell me if you see the exchange that you had with the defendant on the morning of the 18th.
Yes, I do.
Is it shown in its entirety there in States 57?
Yes, it starts with the message, "Call me ASAP, please."
Okay. Call me ASAP, please. So would that be the message that's right at the very top of the screen underneath another line?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, why don't you first just tell us who the message came from, if you can tell by looking at States 57.
So the message came from Andrea Sneiderman.
And is that what we see at the top of the photograph in 57?
Yes.
And is there a date as to when that message was received?
So the first message came in at 10:34 on the 18th
Date?
of November. November 18th, 2010,
Okay, and time.
10:34 a.m.
All right. Now, the message that you received from the defendant, Andrea Sneiderman, on November 18th at 10:34 a.m., it says what, sir?
"Call me ASAP, please."
And the next line is what?
My response was 5 minutes.
And is that when you say you were asking her if it could wait 5 minutes?
I was essentially expressing that I would call in 5 minutes.
Okay. And then the next line reads what, sir?
My husband was shot.
And what's the next line after that?
My response back, calling, and it was at that point that I walked out of the training course and made the phone call.
Okay. And when you walked out of the training course and made the phone call, did you in fact speak with her?
Yes, I did.
And we will get to that in 1 second. But right after calling, there's another line.
That's correct.
Did that communication take place during the November 18th date as well?
No, it did not. That communication is a subsequent text communication that happened some time later.
Okay, so it had nothing to do with the events of November 18th. Is
That's
that
correct.
All right. So you told us that you stepped out into the hallway, and you actually communicated with her.
Correct.
Can you explain for us what happened in that conversation?
Well, my recollection of the phone conversation is essentially that she was communicating to me that she needed to leave, and would I make contact with her manager to inform him that her husband had been shot.
Okay. And did you agree to do so?
Yes, I did.
And did you in fact contact her manager to let him know
Yes, I did.
that her husband had been shot? Okay, if we could please publish States 58. Are you able to read States 58, sir?
Yes, I can.
All right. Can you look at States 58 and tell us who that communication was with?
That communication is to Hemi Newman.
And the date, please?
On November 18th, 2010,
Time.
10:45 a.m.
All right. Tell us about the communication you had with Hemi Newman that morning.
So I sent that first text message, Hemi, it's Alan Shackley. I need to make contact with you. Andrea's had a family emergency that I need to make you aware of.
And was that your communication to Hemi Newman?
That is correct. So the reason that I expressed that it is Alan Shackley is the first time I'd ever sent a text message to Hemi, so I wanted to make sure he knew that it was me.
Okay, so while you told us you had contact with the defendant quite often, did you have contact with Hemi Newman often?
Not often. We would be in meetings together periodically, but not on a daily basis.
All right. So in this call, you wanted to make sure that he understood the message was coming from you.
That's correct.
All right. And did he respond to your text?
He did.
What did he say?
Call my cell.
And what did you do, sir?
At that point, I don't recall. I believe I called him that morning, but I'm not certain.
All right. Now, there's a line underneath that says, "Call my cell."
That's correct.
Who is that from?
That is from Hemi Newman.
All right. Was that all part of the same text, or was it a back and forth? Do you recall?
That was part of the same text. It came shortly after I sent that message.
And it says what, sir?
It just says, "Call my cell."
Ne-
Oh, the second line. So he responded back. I talked to her, and I responded back to his text. Okay, good.
I just talked to her. You know what that says? If I remember,
That's correct. That's coming from Hemi Newman saying,
when you said, you didn't say, you didn't say, "I just talked to her," you know what it says?
that's what it says. I just talked to her. Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay. And so he says, "I just talked to her," correct?
That's correct.
And did you respond?
I said, okay, good. So you are in the know. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
All right. Was there any more communication that you had with Hemi Newman that day?
Not that I recall.
Did you have any more communication with the defendant that day?
Yes, I did.
When did you have further communication with her?
At some point later in the morning, I received a phone call from Andrea informing me that her husband had passed away, and again asking for me to let her manager know that she would be out for some time.
Okay. So she was able to communicate to her manager through you, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, do you know where she was when she first reached out to you?
I do not know.
Do you know if she had gone to the hospital at that time?
I do not recall.
Did she say anything to you that told you where she was at that time?
No.
You have just 1 second, Your
You
Honor?
may.
Thank you. And I have
Back on the
just,
record? Go
thank
ahead.
you, Your Honor, I'm sorry. We have one last question. The BlackBerry that you had with GE, do you recall the phone number?
Yes, I do.
May I have it, please?
The phone number is 404-202-7082.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Who's witness? Mr. Petrie, you may cross-examine if you wish.
Thank you, sir. And Ms. Carpenter, D16 would be next.
Yes, D16 is next.
Your Honor, I'm sorry. May I approach the court reporter? just-
You may approach the court reporter, Kelly Carpenter.
Mr. Shackley, again, I'm John Petrie, and you were kind enough to speak with me briefly earlier, so I've got just a few questions for you. When, on a normal work day, if everybody's in his or her office, your and Andrea's offices were fairly close together.
That's correct.
On this day, however, you were in training in another building.
That's correct.
Do you have any personal knowledge whether or not Andrea was ever at work that day?
I do not.
Now, she first texted you, you said, at 10:40, correct, sir? At 10:34.
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd ask permission to published to the jury Defendants Exhibit number 16, which is date stamp number 3273.
3273?
Yes, sir. It's a page of the telephone records that have been stipulated as accurate for Mrs. Snyder.
No objection
All
to
right.
the statement.
It will be admitted and it may be published.
Can you?
That'll be D16.
We want to start on 150, see if you can focus down there.
Did you need a marker to highlight something, or you just want?
You know what?
Well, you don't have to.
I was just going to see if he could
No,
blow
that's
it up
fine.
there a little bit. You know what, Your Honor, I'm going to do this. The document does not lend itself to showing times and everything. I'm going to show this to Mr. Shackford,
Oh, you
if I might.
may approach.
Mr. Shackford, this has been admitted, sir. I'm going to ask you with me just to look at this document, which is not one generated by you, but it's been stipulated in, and ask you to look with me at the bottom of this record and see if it shows, starting on line 150, if it shows any activity.
Okay. I was just going to say, I'm going to object if counsel's going to, I guess, narrate the form and what it means, but I have no objection to asking a question about
Right.
it.
If he sees his number on here is what I'm asking.
Oh, that's what it's asking. Do you see your number?
Right. I was trying to speed it up since there's about 30 entries on there. Start with the bottom of the page.
That's why I offer you to highlight.
Okay. Now, may I approach you?
And Your Honor, I'm going to object to a document being placed on.
Well, I'm going to say, if you don't mind, sir, if you could remove that, because he's looking.
One or the other.
One or the other. Because that one's not highlighted. Is that correct, Mr. Peter?
That is not highlighted.
The one that was on the screen had highlights on it, so that's a different document.
Now, do you see your telephone number in that? Does the highlighting help you find where that is?
Yes, I see my number.
Do you see any, in the column noted originating number, do you see your number appearing there anywhere, sir?
Yes, I do.
And in the terminating number, do you also see some as well, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And again, what was your number at that time, please, Mr. Shackley?
404-202-7082.
Let me show you, if I might, what has previously been marked and tendered and admitted, the Defendant's Exhibit number 17, and ask you if you see on this mobility usage chart, if you see your number either in the originating number or the terminating number on this page, sir.
Yes, I do.
And does that record reflect what time your telephone made any calls?
Yes, it does.
And what time does it show, please, sir?
It would indicate that I placed a call at 10:36 a.m.
Okay. And does it show any other calls that you received from Mrs. Sneiderman's number, sir?
Yes, it does.
And what time was that, please, sir?
It would indicate that I received a call at 10:36 a.m.
Okay. Now, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please, Mr. Shackley, you did not see Mrs. Sneiderman that morning?
That's correct.
You spoke with her on the phone or texted with her, and that's the only communications that you have with her on that morning.
Yes.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what her demeanor, what her voice sounded like when you actually spoke to her? Obviously, you can't do that with the text message, but when she spoke to you, what did you notice, if anything, about the way she was speaking?
As I recall, she seemed upset.
Okay. Do you remember speaking with Detectives Boyer and Clifton at the Dunwoody Police Department sometime later?
I spoke with him, but it was not at the police department. It was at the GE headquarters.
Okay. Do you remember telling them that she was not making much sense?
Yes, I do recall.
Okay. And at the time that you told that to the police at the GE headquarters, did you believe that that was an accurate description of her demeanor back on the morning of November the 18th, sir?
Yes.
Now, I believe I understood you to state that you had not had any further communication with Hemi Newman, other than the text messaging or phone calls on that day. Is that correct?
I had additional contact with Hemi that day, yes.
Okay, and that's what I want to ask you. You actually saw him in person later that day, did you not?
That is correct.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where that contact was and what happened there, sir?
Following the subsequent communication with Andrea, I went up to Hemi's office and met with him there. We actually stepped out into the hallway next to his office.
And did you inform him of what you had learned? Did he inform you of what he had learned? What was the nature of that conversation, please, sir?
I informed him that I had learned from Andrea that her husband had died, and that was the essential gist of the conversation.
Did you or he make any request of the other to let other folks at GE know?
Yeah, we had discussed briefly that we needed to talk with Human Resources to figure out how we should communicate to the rest of the staff.
Did Mr. Newman make any comment to you about that seemed odd at the time to you?
I recall that Mr. Newman was requested that we don't communicate anything right away.
Now, when you actually spoke with Mrs. Sneiderman on the phone, the records indicate the total conversation was about 35 or 40 seconds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And she told you that her husband had been shot and that she was leaving.
That's correct.
She did not say, "I'm leaving work," did she?
Not that I recall.
And I believe since you weren't at your office that day, your assumption at the time was she was leaving work.
As I recall, yes.
Okay. But that was just an assumption based on a normal work day, that's where she's going to be.
Correct.
You have no personal knowledge as to when she was notified of anything that happened to her husband, correct?
Correct.
And you have no personal knowledge where she was when she placed that telephone call to you.
Correct.
You have no personal knowledge as to where she was leaving or where she was going when she had that conversation with you.
Correct.
She simply stated words to the effect of, "My husband's been shot, I'm leaving, please let Hemi or please let my manager know."
Correct.
Okay. One moment, please, Your Honor.
You may. Take as much time as you need.
All I have
We're
of
back
Mr.
on the record.
Shackley-
Yes, sir.
That's all I have of Mr. Shackley, Your Honor. Thank
May
you
I
so
have my
much.
marker back?
Yes, sir.
All right, you may approach. Is there any redirect?
Just one, Your Honor.
Ask as many questions as you wish.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can do it from here. Mr. Shackley.
No, come up to the microphone, please. I will make sure the court reporter can take everything down. I'm not limiting your questions. Ask as many as you wish.
Yes, Judge, thank you. Mr. Shackley, the exchange you had when the defendant said, "My husband's been shot," what time was that, sir?
Well, the phone call happened almost immediately after that set of text messages, so I would assume it was approximately 10:36 a.m.
That was the phone call. The first time she said to you, "My husband has been shot," what time was that?
Per the photograph, it was at 10:34 a.m.
Thank you, sir.
Any recross?
Just very quickly.
As many as you wish. Come on up to
Per
the
the
mic.
photograph, that is the text message of which we have a photograph here today.
That is correct.
Okay. At 10:34 shows us that you got a text message saying that my husband has been shot.
Correct.
Whether it was a telephone, in-person, text message, email, anything like that, the first time she mentioned that to you in any form whatsoever was 10:34 in the morning.
Correct.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, lawyers, may this witness be released and excused from his subpoena?
No objection from the
Any
state.
objection?
No objection from
All
the
right, you're free to
defense.
go. Have a good day, sir. Call your next witness.
State College Detective Maldonado. And Your Honor, may I approach one moment?
Come on up, lawyers.
Thank you.
Back to 11 Alive's live continuing coverage of the Andrea Sneiderman trial. I'm Jeff Hellinger, joined by Will Smith. We saw a former General Electric employee who worked with Hemi Newman, and also Andrea Sneiderman just leave the stand. Alan Shachtman, and he explained that the first phone call that he received from Andrea Sneiderman was at 10:30 on the day of the murder, and then he notified Hemi Newman, her boss, as directed by her, about 10:45.
And it's clear the prosecution is trying to establish that timeline that started with Don Sneiderman stating that he was informed sometime around 9:30
I've been advised that this next
by
witness also
Andrea
works
that he
undercover.
was shot.
All right, back to the courtroom.
Face not be recorded to protect him and his life. All right. Bring him in, please, or her in. Bring the next witness in.
Thank you.
All right, now, the jurors is indicating they want a break. They're giving me the break sign. I'm going to go ahead and give them a break at this point in time. What I'm going to do, sir, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and give you a break. Someone told me they needed a break, which is okay. Just go ahead and have a seat for a quick second. It's going to be in the neighborhood of 10 minutes. All right, just follow the instructions of the deputy. We'll be a 10-minute break. All right.
Okay, so we're going to take about a 10-minute break here, and